Hospitals were supposed to be safe places, but Elena felt the opposite. Every step through the sterile hallways, every form she signed under her false name, felt like a trap waiting to spring shut. When Lucas was finally discharged, she packed their few belongings and left before sunrise. She couldn't afford to linger. Adrian's shadow stretched too far. But what she didn't know was that her brief hospital stay had already left ripples. A nurse whispered to another about the mysterious woman whose son had been admitted under a strange name, but looked eerily like Adrian Carter. The janitor overheard Marcus Hale covering the bills. Rumors spread like wildfire in hushed voices, rumors that eventually reached the ears of those who reported directly to Adrian himself. At Carter Enterprises, Adrian sat at the head of a gleaming glass conference table. Vanessa perched beside him, dressed in designer silk, her hand resting on his arm like she owned him. One of his associates leaned forward nervously. "There's talk, sir, about your late wife." Adrian's jaw clenched. "My late wife is 6 feet under." End of story. The associate swallowed. "With respect, sir, someone claims to have seen her at St. Luke's Hospital with a boy." The words hit Adrian like a strike of lightning. For a split second, he faltered. Then his lips curled into a cruel smile. Ghost stories. People love to stir trouble, but... He leaned back, tapping his fingers against the polished table. "If she's alive, I'll know. And if she's alive, she won't be for long." Meanwhile, Elena tried to build walls higher around her fragile world. She moved into a shabby apartment on the outskirts of the city, where peeling paint and flickering lights replaced the warmth of Abigail's cottage. Marcus had offered financial help, but she refused. Accepting it would mean owing him, and she couldn't risk being a pawn in another man's game. Still, Marcus did not disappear. He visited, bringing food for Lucas, books for Elena. Each time, his eyes lingered too long, as if studying her not just as a woman, but as a weapon he intended to use. One evening, after Lucas had gone to bed, Marcus spoke bluntly. "Adrian knows you can't hide forever. When the storm hits, you'll need protection. Align with me, and you'll never have to fear him again." Elena shook her head. "I don't want revenge. I just want peace for my son." Marcus leaned closer, his voice low. "Peace is a luxury Adrian will never allow you. He buried you once. He'll do it again if you let him." Elena's hands trembled as she held her teacup. She hated that Marcus was right. She hated even more that the man who had once vowed to love her was now hunting her like prey. The next day at Lucas's school, she felt the weight of whispers following her. Other parents glanced her way, murmuring behind cupped hands. One even asked outright, "Aren't you Elena Carter? Didn't you die?" Elena's blood ran cold. Panic clawed at her chest as she grabbed Lucas's hand and fled before the questions grew louder. Back in her apartment, she locked the door and sank to the floor, clutching her son tightly. For the first time in years, she realized the walls she had built were crumbling. And somewhere across the city, Adrian was already on his way, determined to uncover whether the ghost of his past was truly back among the living. The invitation arrived folded neatly inside a plain envelope, slid under her apartment door. Elena almost threw it away, until she saw the name printed across the top. Carter Enterprises Investment Summit. Her breath caught. It wasn't addressed to her, but to Miss Elaine Carter, her old name, the one she hadn't used in 5 years. Her hands shook as she clutched the paper. Someone had delivered it on purpose. Someone wanted her there. That night, she sat at the kitchen table staring at the letter while Lucas slept peacefully in the next room. Marcus's words echoed in her mind. "You can't hide forever." Maybe he was right. Maybe running was no longer possible. 2 weeks later, Elena found herself walking into the towering glass skyscraper that bore Adrian's name. She had dressed simply, a navy blouse and worn blazer, hardly enough to hide her racing heart. The conference hall buzzed with executives, investors, and reporters. Flashing cameras captured every moment. And then, across the stage, she saw him. Adrian Carter, her husband, the man who left her to die. He looked untouchable in his black suit, Vanessa gleaming at his side in a crimson dress. He spoke with the confidence of a king addressing his court. But when his eyes swept the room and landed on Elena, the mask slipped. His lips parted, his voice faltered for the briefest second. The audience didn't notice, but Elena did. The program continued, and one by one, companies presented their bids. Elena sat quietly, praying she could remain invisible. But fate twisted cruelly. Her name was called next. She rose, clutching her modest proposal folder. Every step to the podium felt like walking into a fire. Whispers erupted around the hall. Cameras turned, bulbs flashing furiously. "Isn't she dead?" someone hissed. "Looks just like her," another voice murmured. Elena steadied her voice as best she could. "Good afternoon. My name is Elena Carter." The room gasped collectively. Adrian's fists slammed the table. "Security!" he barked, his face pale with fury. But Marcus Hale stood suddenly from the front row, raising a hand. "She has every right to present, unless you're afraid of what she has to say." His tone cut like steel. The hall froze. Adrian glared at his rival, veins bulging at his temples. "You dare?" Marcus smirked. "Oh, I dare." Elena's knees nearly buckled, but she pressed on, unfolding her designs for a low-cost housing project. She spoke with trembling passion about giving families a chance, about survival and dignity. The words weren't just about buildings, they were about her life, her struggle. When she finished, the room erupted, not in applause but in chaos. Investors whispered, journalists scribbled frantically. Some looked moved, others looked scandalized. Adrian stormed to the stage, towering over her. His voice was venom. "You should have stayed buried." Elena met his eyes, her chest heaving. "And you should have been a man when your family needed you." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vanessa's smile froze, her hand gripping Adrian's arm tightly. For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy. Then Adrian leaned so close only she could hear. His words were low, dangerous. "If you think you can humiliate me and walk away, Elena, you're wrong. This time, I'll make sure you disappear for good." He pulled back, his smile wide for the cameras, clapping slowly as though congratulating her. To the world, it looked like a cordial exchange. But Elena knew the storm had just begun. And as she left the stage, she felt eyes burning into her back. Not just Adrian's, but someone else's, watching and waiting. The morning after the investment summit, Elena's name was on every news channel. Headlines screamed across television screens and social media feeds. "Wife declared dead, returns to confront billionaire husband." "Scandal at Carter Enterprises, ghost or gold digger." Some reporters painted her as a brave survivor. Others called her a fraud. Elena sat in her small apartment with Lucas on her lap, scrolling through the storm of coverage. Every cruel comment stabbed her heart. She faked her death for money. She abandoned her child. She's just hungry for revenge. None of them knew the truth. By noon, she received a call from Marcus Hale. His voice was calm, measured. "He'll try to break you, Elena. Don't let him. The more he screams, the more he reveals his guilt." But Adrian was already moving faster than she could imagine. That evening, she was summoned to a charity gala, an event she knew would be crawling with reporters. Marcus urged her to attend. If you hide, he wins. If you show up, you prove you're not afraid. So she went. Her borrowed dress was simple, navy blue hat, her nerves barely contained. She entered the ballroom, chandeliers sparkling above, violins humming in the background. At the far end of the hall, Adrian stood with Vanessa on his arm, surrounded by cameras. He looked every bit the untouchable mogul. When he saw her, his smile widened, but it wasn't warmth, it was a predator's grin. He raised his glass and called for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began smoothly, "thank you for joining us tonight. As you may have heard, a rather surprising face has returned." Every eye turned to Elena. Whispers rippled like wildfire. Adrian continued, his voice dripping with mockery. 5 years ago, the world mourned my late wife. And now, like some ghost out of a tragic novel, she's back. But let's not be fooled. This isn't a miracle, it's a performance. The crowd chuckled uneasily. Elena's stomach churned. Adrian pressed on, his words sharp as knives. She abandoned her family, faked her own death, and now reappears, conveniently aligned with my greatest enemy, Marcus Hale. Tell me, does that sound like love? Or a plot for power? Vanessa smirked, her diamond earrings catching the light. She's here for money, she added sweetly, loud enough for everyone to hear. Some women will do anything to get attention. Laughter erupted. The humiliation was unbearable. Elena's cheeks burned as tears stung her eyes. She wanted to scream the truth, that she had nearly died, that Adrian had left her bleeding, that Vanessa was nothing but a thief in a designer gown. But her voice caught in her throat. Across the room, Marcus watched with clenched fists, his jaw tight. He took a step forward, ready to intervene, but Elena raised her hand ever so slightly, stopping him. She didn't want to appear weak, hiding behind another man. Summoning every ounce of courage, she spoke. "You can try to silence me, Adrian, but the truth always finds a way out." Gasps echoed. Cameras flashed wildly. For a moment, power shifted. But Adrian's eyes glimmered with cold fury. He leaned close, whispering so only she could hear. "Truth means nothing when I own every headline." Alina's heart sank, because she knew, with his money and influence, he could twist the story until the world believed his lies. And the next morning, when she saw her face plastered across tabloids with the words "fraudulent widow," she realized Adrian had already begun his war. The tabloids didn't just destroy Elena's reputation, they poisoned everything around her. At Lucas's elementary school, whispers began spreading like wildfire. Parents exchanged pitying looks, teachers murmured in the hallways, and children, cruel in their innocence, repeated the words they overheard at home. One afternoon, Alina waited outside the classroom, her hands twisting nervously. When the bell rang, Lucas shuffled out, his backpack slung low and his eyes red. He didn't run into her arms like he usually did. Instead, he stared at the ground, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, is it true?" Her heart clenched. "True? What do you mean, sweetheart?" "They said you lied, that you pretended to die, that you left Dad because you didn't love him, and that he didn't want me." His small voice cracked on the last words, tears brimming in his eyes. Elena dropped to her knees, clutching his shoulders. "Lucas, listen to me. None of that is true. Not one word. I love you more than anything in this world." "But why would they say it if it's not true?" he asked, sobbing now. "Why would Dad say it?" The mention of Adrian's name cut through her like glass. Alina swallowed hard, fighting back her own tears. How could she explain betrayal, greed, and abandonment to a child so young? How could she tell him that the man whose blood he shared had signed her death with a smirk on his face? She pulled him into her arms, rocking him as though he were still a baby. "Your father made choices, bad choices, but you are not one of them. You are my miracle. You are the best part of my life." Lucas buried his face in her shoulder, his small fists gripping her blouse. "Then promise you'll never leave me." Elena's chest ached as she kissed his hair. "I promise. I will never ever leave you." That night, after Lucas had fallen asleep, Elena sat alone by the window. The city lights flickered like cruel stars. She realized for the first time that Adrian's war wasn't just against her. It was against her son. He had poisoned Lucas's innocence, planting seeds of doubt and shame. That, more than anything, was unforgivable. The next morning, Alina arrived at the school to find a black car idling near the entrance. Her blood froze when she saw the tinted window roll down, revealing Adrian himself. His eyes locked on Lucas as he stepped out with a polished smile. "Well, well, the ghost walks in daylight," he drawled, his gaze shifting to Elena. "You've kept my son from me long enough." Lucas looked between them, confused. "Mom, is that my dad?" Elena's breath caught. She opened her mouth to speak, but Adrian crouched down, extending his hand toward the boy. "Yes, son, it's me, your real father." Lucas hesitated, glancing at his mother. Elena shook her head sharply, her heart pounding. She wanted to scream, to pull him away, but Adrian's charm was insidious. He knew exactly how to bend a child's curiosity to his will. "Don't listen to him, Lucas," Elena said firmly, her voice shaking. "He's not who you think he is." Adrian's smile didn't falter, but his eyes glinted with cruelty. "Children deserve the truth, Elena, even if you're too weak to give it to them." The school bell rang, breaking the moment. Adrian straightened his suit and walked away, leaving Elena trembling. Lucas stared after him, his face a storm of confusion and hurt. And in that instant, Elena realized she wasn't just fighting for her own survival anymore. She was fighting for her son's very soul. The encounter at Lucas's school haunted Elena for days. She replayed every second in her mind. The way Adrian had smiled so convincingly, the way Lucas had hesitated, torn between curiosity and loyalty. It was clear, Adrian would stop at nothing to pull her son into his world. But Elena wasn't alone. Marcus Hale showed up at her apartment one evening, his expression grim, his coat damp from the rain. He carried a folder under his arm. "You need to see this," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Elena folded her arms defensively. "If this is another warning about Adrian, I've heard enough." Marcus's gaze was steady. "No, Elena, you've only heard what he wanted you to believe. This is the truth." He opened the folder and spread documents across her kitchen table. Bank records, signed affidavits, medical reports. Her breath caught as her eyes skimmed the papers. "What is all this?" she whispered. "Proofs," Marcus replied. "Proof that Adrian didn't just abandon you that night. He ordered the doctors to stop treatment. He told them you were a liability. He wanted you gone." Elena's stomach churned. She shook her head violently. "No, I knew he left me, but this is murder." Marcus leaned closer, his voice low. "It was an attempted murder, Elena, and he got away with it because everyone was too afraid to cross him." Her hands trembled as she picked up a report showing Adrian's signature at the bottom of a hospital authorization form, authorizing them to declare her dead without further intervention. The room spun. She clutched the table for support, nausea rising. "He wanted me dead, and he wanted my son to grow up without a mother." Marcus's jaw tightened. He never intended to raise that boy either. Vanessa doesn't want a child complicating her perfect life. Adrian said it himself, to his board. He called Lucas a mistake. Elena's knees buckled. She sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands as sobs shook her body. Every sacrifice she had made, every sleepless night keeping her child alive, had been in defiance of a man who had written them both off like trash. Marcus knelt beside her, his voice gentler now. "Elena, I know you don't want to fight, but if you don't, Adrian will take everything. Your son, your dignity, your future. I'm giving you the tools to stop him." She lifted her tear-streaked face. "Why are you helping me? Is this just about your war with him?" For a moment, his eyes softened, a flicker of something more personal breaking through his hardened mask. "It started that way. But it isn't just about Adrian anymore. I won't let him destroy you." The silence between them was heavy, charged. Elena's heart raced, not with romance, but with the terrifying possibility that someone finally cared whether she lived or died. Lucas appeared in the doorway, rubbing his sleepy eyes. "Mom? Who's he?" Elena forced a trembling smile. "Just a friend." Marcus stood, his gaze never leaving hers. "Not just a friend. Someone who's going to make sure Adrian Carter never hurts you again." Elena swallowed hard. She wanted to believe him, but trust was a fragile thing, shattered too many times before. And as Marcus left that night, Elena stared at the damning papers on her table, knowing that sooner or later she would have to choose, keep hiding or stand and fight with everything she had left. For days, the papers Marcus left behind sat untouched on Elena's kitchen table. She couldn't bring herself to look at them again. The evidence of Adrian's betrayal was too heavy, too cruel. But every time Lucas laughed, every time she watched him sleep peacefully, she remembered Marcus's words. "He called your son a mistake." The rage simmered beneath her grief. For 5 years she had endured humiliation, poverty, and fear. She had swallowed every insult, every lie, because survival was all she could manage. But now she knew the truth. Adrian hadn't just abandoned her. He had tried to erase her. And he would keep trying unless she stopped him. One night, after Lucas was tucked into bed, Elena pulled the folder closer and studied every page. Her hands no longer trembled. They were steady, deliberate, as if drawing strength from the ink and signatures that proved her suffering wasn't a delusion. For the first time in years, she didn't feel weak. She felt clarity. The next morning, she sought Marcus out. He was in his office, a skyscraper of steel and glass that overlooked the city like a fortress. When she entered, he looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face. "I thought you might burn those papers," he said. "I almost did," Elena admitted. "But then I realized, if I stay silent, I'm as guilty as the people who helped him." She took a deep breath. "Teach me. Show me how to fight him." Marcus studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then let's begin." The training wasn't glamorous. Marcus pushed her to rebuild the confidence Adrian had stripped away. He introduced her to allies, lawyers unafraid of Adrian's influence, journalists hungry for the truth, investors who had grown tired of Adrian's arrogance. At first, Elena shrank back, her voice trembling when she spoke. But day by day, she grew stronger. She cut her hair, trading the timid waves for a sharp, confident style. She updated her wardrobe, not with luxury, but with simple, commanding pieces that reflected authority. More importantly, she found her voice again. The first time she presented her housing project to Marcus's board, she spoke clearly, passionately, and when the room erupted in applause, she realized something powerful. She was more than Adrian's discarded wife. She was Elena Carter, a woman with vision. Still, doubt crept in late at night. Could she really win against a man who owned headlines, judges, and half the city's elite? She feared Adrian would retaliate, and she was right. Within weeks, his smear campaigns escalated. News outlets he controlled painted her as unstable, accusing her of abandoning her child, of chasing Marcus for his wealth. Paparazzi camped outside her building, snapping photos of her carrying groceries as if she were a criminal. But this time, Elena didn't hide. She walked through the flashes with her chin high, Lucas's hand in hers. She ignored the insults shouted from across the street. And when a reporter demanded, "Why are you back, Mrs. Carter? What do you want?" she stopped, met the camera lens head-on, and answered firmly, "I want justice. For myself, for my son, and for every woman who has ever been silenced." The clip went viral overnight. For the first time, public opinion began to shift. People weren't just whispering about Adrian's betrayed wife anymore. They were talking about a survivor who refused to stay buried. Adrian watched the footage in his penthouse, fury twisting his features. He hurled a glass across the room, shattering it against the wall. Vanessa flinched at his side, but he ignored her. "She thinks she's strong? He spat. "Let's remind her who she's dealing with." And as Elena celebrated her first small victory, Adrian was already plotting a blow that would strike deeper than anything she could imagine. Vanessa Blake had always imagined herself untouchable. She had clawed her way from an assistant's desk to the arm of Adrian Carter, now draped in designer gowns and flashing diamonds that caught every camera's lens. But recently, something had begun gnawing at her polished exterior. It was Elena, the woman who was supposed to be dead, the woman Adrian dismissed as weak, the woman who was suddenly everywhere, her face on news segments, her voice in interviews, her story turning public sympathy against Adrian. Vanessa watched one of Elena's televised statements from the penthouse sofa, her glass of wine trembling in her hand. "She's stealing the spotlight," Vanessa hissed, her tone sharp. "Adrian, can't you see? People believe her." Adrian, pacing by the window, barely glanced at her. "They won't for long. I've survived bigger scandals." But Vanessa wasn't convinced. She had seen the way Adrian reacted when Elena's name was mentioned. The tension in his jaw, the flicker in his eyes. He claimed it was anger, but Vanessa recognized something else. Fear. And fear made her dangerous. That night, Vanessa made a call. To an old acquaintance in the media world, a gossip blogger notorious for destroying reputations with a single post. She offered a tidy sum and an even tidier story. That Elena Carter had faked her death for insurance money, that she had been living with Marcus Hale all along, conspiring to ruin Adrian's empire. Within hours, the headlines exploded. Dead wife's dirty secret, affair with Adrian's rival exposed. Elena Carter, survivor or schemer? The story spread like wildfire. Photos of Elena walking near Marcus's office were twisted into evidence of a secret romance. Pictures of Marcus delivering groceries to her apartment became proof of financial support. Elena woke to the chaos, her phone buzzing with messages. She scrolled through the fabricated headlines, her chest tightening. Lucas, sitting at the breakfast table, looked up with wide, confused eyes. "Mom, what does this mean?" Her throat closed. She forced a calm smile, brushing his hair back. "It means people will say anything when they're afraid of the truth." But inside, she was crumbling. She had worked so hard to reclaim her dignity, and now Vanessa's lies threatened to unravel everything. Marcus stormed into her apartment that afternoon, slamming the tabloids down on her table. "This is Vanessa's doing," he said coldly. "Adrian doesn't get his hands this dirty. She does. And she's desperate." Elena pressed her palms to her temples. "How do I fight lies this big? How do I protect Lucas when every child at school will see this?" Marcus's eyes softened for a moment. "You don't fight fire with silence. You show them the truth." Still, Vanessa's plan worked for a time. Investors pulled back from Elena's housing project, wary of scandal. Parents at Lucas's school whispered louder, some even pulling their children away from him. The humiliation returned, sharper than ever. But Vanessa hadn't counted on her own arrogance. At a glittering gala weeks later, she flaunted herself in a scarlet gown, drunk on champagne and her supposed victory. She bragged loudly to her circle of friends, "Of course I leaked those photos. How else do you crush a ghost?" What she didn't realize was that one of Marcus's allies was recording every word. The clip surfaced online within hours, spreading faster than her fabricated stories. Public opinion shifted again, not just against Adrian, but now against Vanessa, exposed as a scheming liar. Adrian's rage was volcanic. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" he roared, smashing a glass against the wall. Vanessa, pale and trembling, tried to backpedal. "I was only protecting you." But Adrian's eyes were ice. "You were protecting yourself." And as Vanessa realized her position was slipping, she knew one thing. If she didn't destroy Elena completely, she would be the one left in ruins. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, a place where lives could be rebuilt or destroyed with the strike of a gavel. Elena sat stiffly at the petitioner's table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Lucas was too young to understand, thankfully kept away from the proceedings, but the fight was about him. Across the aisle sat Adrian, exuding the smug confidence of a man who had never lost. Vanessa perched beside him like a jewel on display, her lips curved in a mocking smile. Adrian's high-powered attorneys lined the bench, their briefcases gleaming with menace. The judge, an older woman with steel-gray hair and piercing eyes, called the session to order. Adrian's attorney rose first, his voice smooth and poisonous. "Your Honor, we are here today to protect a child from a woman who has proven herself unfit. Elena Carter faked her own death, abandoned her family, and has now resurfaced in questionable circumstances, aligning herself with Adrian's greatest rival. She is unstable and cannot provide a safe home for Lucas." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Elena's chest tightened, but she forced herself to sit tall. She wanted to scream that it was all lies, but her attorney, a sharp young woman Marcus had arranged, gently squeezed her arm. "Wait, breathe." Then came the dagger. Adrian's lawyer held up a document. "Here is the death certificate signed 5 years ago. Legally, Elena Carter does not exist. How can a dead woman raise a child?" The room erupted in murmurs. Elena's heart stopped. She had known Adrian was ruthless, but to twist the very paper that declared her gone, it was unthinkable. Her attorney rose quickly. "Your Honor, my client was wrongly declared dead after her husband abandoned her during a life-threatening labor. She survived due to medical negligence being covered up, negligence signed off by Mr. Carter himself." She placed the damning hospital forms Marcus had uncovered onto the judge's desk. "These signatures prove Mr. Carter ordered doctors to stop treatment. This is not a custody case. This is attempted murder." The courtroom froze. Reporters scribbled furiously. Adrian's face twitched, but he forced a smirk. "Desperate lies from a desperate woman," he muttered. The judge examined the papers, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Carter, these are serious accusations." Adrian leaned back, his tone oozing charm. "Your Honor, my wife has been manipulated by Marcus Hale to attack me. This is not about the child. It's about corporate rivalry. My son belongs with me, not in the clutches of my enemy." The words cut Elena like knives. She wanted to shout, "Lucas is not a prize to be claimed. He's my son." But her throat burned with unshed tears. Her attorney pressed forward, calling Nurse Abigail to the stand. The older woman's hands trembled as she spoke, recounting the night Elena nearly died. She wasn't weak. She wasn't gone. Adrian left her there to bleed. If I hadn't intervened, both she and the baby would have been lost. The courtroom gasped again. Vanessa shifted uneasily, her grip tightening on Adrian's arm. He whispered something to her through clenched teeth, his facade cracking under the weight of truth. The judge raised a hand for silence. "This court will recess until tomorrow. I will review the evidence and reconvene. Until then, the child will remain with his mother." Relief washed over Elena, but it was thin and fragile. Adrian leaned across the aisle as the bailiff dismissed the room. His smile was venom. "Enjoy tonight, Elena. Tomorrow I'll bury you for real." And as she walked out of the courthouse, Elena knew the fight was far from over, because Adrian never played fair, and the next strike would be deadly. The courthouse doors swung open, and Elena stepped into a storm of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Reporters swarmed like vultures, microphones thrust inches from her face. "Mrs. Carter, did you fake your death? Is Marcus Hale paying you to testify against your ex-husband? Are you trying to destroy Adrian's career?" The words blurred into a wall of noise. Elena clutched her bag tightly, her breathing quickening. Her knees threatened to buckle. Then a firm hand rested on her back. "This way." Marcus's deep voice cut through the chaos. He guided her forward, his body shielding hers from the crush of photographers. His security detail flanked them, forcing the crowd back. Elena blinked up at him, her lips trembling. "Why are you here?" He glanced down, his jaw set. "Because Adrian doesn't fight fair. You won't face him alone." They ducked into a waiting black car. Inside, the sudden silence felt jarring after the frenzy outside. Elena leaned back, pressing a hand over her racing heart. Lucas's small face appeared in her mind, the only reason she was enduring any of this. Marcus watched her closely. "He's going to come harder tomorrow. You saw it in his eyes." "I know," she whispered, her voice cracked. "I'm terrified. Not for me, for Lucas. Adrian doesn't love him. He just wants to win." Marcus's expression softened for a moment, the steel in his eyes giving way to something warmer. "You're right. To Adrian, Lucas is a weapon, a pawn. But to me, he's your son, and that makes him worth protecting." Elena swallowed hard. The sincerity in his voice shook her more than Adrian's threats. She wanted to believe him, but trust had become a foreign language. The next day, the courtroom filled to capacity. Every seat was taken, reporters scribbling, cameras hidden under coats, despite the judge's warnings. Adrian strutted in like a king reclaiming his throne, Vanessa glittering on his arm. Elena felt the familiar wave of dread, but when Marcus entered moments later, standing tall at her side, the room shifted. Adrian's eyes narrowed. "So the rumors are true?" he sneered. "You've turned my wife into your puppet." Marcus's calm voice carried easily across the chamber. "No, Adrian, she's not your wife anymore. She's her own woman, and she won't be bullied by you." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge pounded her gavel for silence, but the impact was done. Marcus had declared his side publicly. During cross-examination, Adrian's lawyers tried to paint Elena as unstable, but Marcus's team countered with precision, producing documents, recordings, and witnesses. Every time Adrian's voice dripped with venom, Marcus's presence was steady, like a shield. At one point, Adrian leaned forward, his eyes blazing. "Do you really think you can protect her from me?" Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "Not think, Adrian. No." The tension between them was electric, decades of rivalry boiling into this single battle. The courtroom wasn't just about custody anymore. It was about dominance, reputation, and vengeance. When the session adjourned, Elena gathered her papers with trembling hands. "Marcus, you don't have to risk everything for me." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Elena, I've built empires and watched them burn. None of it matters compared to this. You deserve to be more than Adrian's victim. You deserve to be free." Her throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes. For 5 years she had felt invisible, erased. And now someone was finally standing in front of her. Not to control her, not to silence her, but to protect her. But as they walked out together, Adrian's smirk followed them like a shadow, promising that the next move he made would shatter them both. The Metropolitan Grand Hall glimmered under a canopy of chandeliers, each crystal catching the light like frozen stars. It was the annual Carter Enterprises Charity Gala, the event of the season where the city's elite gathered to sip champagne, flash diamonds, and trade whispers that could shift millions in the stock market. Adrian Carter entered first, his tuxedo sharp, his smile sharper. Vanessa glided beside him, dazzling in emerald silk. Cameras swarmed them, capturing the picture-perfect couple. To the world, Adrian looked untouchable, a king basking in his empire. But the illusion cracked the moment Elena walked in. She wore a gown of midnight blue, simple yet commanding, borrowed from one of Marcus's allies. Her hair was swept back, her eyes fierce despite the storm inside her. Marcus Hale accompanied her, his presence commanding instant attention. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, phones lifted discreetly to capture the scandal unfolding live. "Elena Carter?" someone whispered. "With Marcus Hale? My God, Adrian must be livid." And livid he was. Across the room, Adrian's jaw tightened, his glass nearly shattering in his hand. Vanessa leaned closer, hissing, "Don't give them the satisfaction. Smile." But Adrian's eyes burned holes through Elena as she and Marcus glided into the ballroom, shoulders squared. For the first time, Elena wasn't hiding in shadows, she was standing in the center of the battlefield. The evening unfolded with forced civility. Speeches were given, wine flowed, and the orchestra played a haunting waltz. Yet beneath the glitter, tension thickened like smoke. Guests whispered, shifting between admiration and scandal. Some admired Elena's courage, others questioned her motives. When it was Adrian's turn to address the audience, he stood tall, his voice smooth. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for supporting our mission tonight. But before we continue, I must address the distraction." Every head turned toward Elena. Her chest tightened, but she refused to look away. Adrian spread his hands as if in pity. "A woman I once loved has returned from the grave to smear my name and align herself with my rival. I ask you, does that sound like love or revenge?" Laughter rippled through the crowd. Vanessa smirked triumphantly. Before Elena could respond, Marcus rose beside her, his voice firm. "No, Adrian. It sounds like survival. A woman you left to die, a child you abandoned, are now standing against you. That is not revenge. It is justice." The hall erupted in gasps. Reporters scribbled, cameras flashed despite the ban. Adrian's face darkened, his mask of charm slipping into raw rage. Elena rose too, her voice clear, though her hands trembled. "I don't need your pity, Adrian. I don't need your name, your money, or your lies. I am not here for revenge. I am here because the truth matters, and I will not be silenced again." The room fell silent, the orchestra forgotten. Even those who doubted her before felt the tremor of conviction in her words. For the first time, Adrian wasn't in control of the narrative, but his fury was far from contained. He leaned close to Vanessa, his words a hiss. "She wants war? I'll give her one." And as the crowd erupted into a storm of whispers, Adrian raised his glass with a smile that masked his rage, already plotting the move that would turn the battle from scandal into all-out destruction. The gala ended in a storm of whispers, but the real storm waited outside. As Elena and Marcus left the glittering hall, paparazzi swarmed, their flashbulbs turning night into chaos. Marcus's security pushed them through the crowd, but Elena's heart pounded. She had stood tall inside, but now she felt the weight of every camera lens dissecting her every move. Marcus's driver opened the door to their car. Elena was about to step inside when a familiar voice cut through the noise. "Elena." She froze. Adrian stood only a few feet away, his tuxedo immaculate, his expression a mask of calm, but his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were locked on her with unsettling intensity. Marcus stepped forward immediately. "She has nothing to say to you." Adrian raised a hand. "Just 5 minutes, alone." Elena hesitated, torn between fury and fear. Marcus looked at her, silently asking if she wanted him to stay. Finally, she nodded. 5 minutes. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he stepped back, his eyes never leaving Adrian. Adrian guided Elena to a quiet corner away from the cameras. His voice softened, rehearsed yet convincing. "You've changed," he murmured. "Stronger. I barely recognize you." Elena folded her arms. "That's because you buried the woman I used to be." His lips curved into a small, regretful smile. "And I regret it every day." She almost laughed at the lie, but his tone was so smooth, so carefully measured, it stirred something dangerous in her chest. He leaned closer. "We could fix this, Elena. You, me, and our son. We could give him the family he deserves." Her heart twisted at the mention of Lucas. "You mean the child you called a mistake?" Adrian flinched, but only for a second. "I was wrong. I was angry. Vanessa, she doesn't matter. None of it matters. What matters is us. Don't let Marcus use you as his weapon. Come back to me, Elena. Let me make things right." For a fleeting moment, the memory of their early days, the laughter, the promises, flashed through her mind. She remembered the man she once loved, the man she thought would protect her forever. But then, just as quickly came the other memories. The hospital bed, the blood, his retreating back as he left her to die. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't for him. They were for the years she lost, the scars she carried, the child she raised alone. She straightened her shoulders, her voice steady. "You don't want me back, Adrian. You just don't want to lose." His jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake." "No," she said firmly. "The mistake was ever believing you loved me." Adrian's mask cracked, the charm slipping into raw anger. "If you think Marcus will save you, you're a fool. He'll use you until you're nothing, just like everyone else." Elena turned away, her decision final. "At least he didn't leave me to die." She walked back toward Marcus, who was waiting with watchful eyes. Adrian stood frozen for a moment, fury etched across his face. Then his voice, low and venomous, carried after her. "If I can't have you, no one will." And as Alina slid into Marcus's car, her hands trembling, she knew Adrian's plea hadn't been about reconciliation. It had been a declaration of war. Vanessa Blake had always known how to play her part. She was the glittering jewel on Adrian Carter's arm, the perfect accessory to his empire. But after the gala, cracks began to spread. Investors whispered doubts, reporters shifted their gaze, and Adrian's fury burned hotter with every passing day. At first, Vanessa tried to comfort him, cooing sweet reassurances in their penthouse suite. "Don't worry, darling. People will forget Elena soon enough." But Adrian's patience wore thin. "Do you think I built an empire by waiting for people to forget?" he snapped, his voice slicing through her fragile confidence. That night, Vanessa poured herself another glass of wine, staring at the glittering city below. Elena was a ghost that refused to stay buried, and worse, she was stealing the spotlight Vanessa had fought so hard to claim. For the first time, Vanessa felt invisible, replaceable. She began to scheme. One evening, when Adrian was out handling business, Vanessa met discreetly with a man in a sleek gray suit. His name was Daniel, one of Marcus Hale's legal strategists. Sliding into the back booth of a dimly lit lounge, Vanessa leaned forward, her voice dripping with urgency. "You want Adrian destroyed? I can help you." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And why would you betray your husband?" Vanessa's laugh was sharp, bitter. "Husband? He treats me like window dressing. Elena's the only woman he's ever truly seen. If helping you ruins him and her, then maybe I'll finally get what I deserve." Daniel studied her carefully. "What do you want in return?" "Money. Status. A future without Adrian dragging me down." She took a slow sip of her drink, her lipstick leaving a crimson stain on the rim. "And maybe a seat beside someone who actually knows how to win." Within days, whispers spread again. But this time, they weren't about Elena. They were about Adrian himself. Confidential documents leaked, shady real estate deals, offshore accounts, questionable campaign donations, the kind of evidence that could topple a man's empire overnight. Adrian stormed into the penthouse one evening, papers clutched in his hand. "Who leaked this?" His voice thundered, echoing against the marble walls. Vanessa feigned innocence, sipping her champagne lazily. "Maybe you've made too many enemies, darling." He slammed the papers onto the glass table, shattering the surface. "Don't play games with me, Vanessa. I can smell betrayal." For the first time, she didn't flinch. She stood, her emerald eyes flashing. "You built your fortune by destroying people. Did you really think no one would ever do the same to you?" Adrian's face darkened, veins bulging at his temples. "Careful, you wouldn't survive a day without me." Vanessa smirked, stepping closer. "That's where you're wrong. I've already started surviving without you." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside. Adrian's fists clenched, his chest heaving with fury. But he said nothing. He simply turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the chandelier trembled. Vanessa exhaled slowly, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. She thought she had finally seized control. She thought she had played her hand perfectly. But what Vanessa didn't know was that Adrian had already discovered her betrayal, and his revenge would be as ruthless as the man himself. Adrian Carter had never tasted desperation. Until now. The headlines that once praised him as a titan of industry now screamed of corruption and betrayal. His leaked accounts were under investigation, investors were fleeing, and the board of Carter Enterprises whispered about replacing him. Vanessa had vanished, her betrayal a dagger he hadn't seen coming. The penthouse that once hosted glittering parties now echoed with silence. Empty champagne bottles rolling across marble floors. Adrian stood at the window overlooking the city. The empire he once ruled, slipping like sand through his fingers. And in that silence, one thought haunted him. Lucas. If the world turned against him, perhaps his son could be his last claim to redemption, or at least his last weapon. The next afternoon, Elena opened her apartment door to find Adrian standing there. Gone was the immaculate suit and perfect smile. He looked worn, almost human. His tie hung loose, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. "Elena," he said softly, almost pleading, "I need to see my son." Every instinct screamed to slam the door in his face, but Lucas appeared behind her, peeking curiously around her leg. "Mom? Who is it?" Adrian crouched, forcing a smile. "It's me, son, your father." Lucas blinked, confusion clouding his young eyes. "You're my dad?" Elena's chest tightened. She wanted to shield him, to drag him away. But Adrian's tone was disarmingly gentle. Yes, and I've made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But I want to make things right. I want to be in your life. Lucas looked up at his mother, searching her face. Elena swallowed hard. She couldn't lie, but she couldn't trust Adrian either. Go to your room, Lucas, she said softly. Please. The boy obeyed reluctantly, leaving Elena alone with the man who had once been her husband. Adrian straightened, his voice dropping to a whisper. You don't have to forgive me, but let me be his father. He deserves at least that much. Elena's anger flared. You left me to die. You called him a mistake. You don't get to rewrite history now because you've lost everything else. Adrian's mask slipped, his eyes narrowing. If you keep him from me, I'll fight until I have him. Courts, money, influence, I'll use everything I have left. She shook her head. You don't understand, Adrian. You don't have anything left. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then, to her shock, Adrian dropped to his knees. His voice broke. Please, Elena. I can't lose him too. He's all I have left. For a flicker of a second, she almost believed him. The mighty Adrian Carter, brought low, begging at her feet. It was a sight she never imagined. But then she saw the flicker in his eyes, the same cold calculation she had once mistaken for love. You don't want Lucas, she whispered. You want control. And you'll never have it again. Her voice was firm, final. She opened the door wide. Get out. Adrian's face twisted, his charm crumbling into raw rage. He rose slowly, towering over her, his voice venomous. This isn't over, Elena. You'll regret this. He stormed out, the door slamming behind him. Elena pressed her back against it, her body trembling. From the hallway, his footsteps echoed like thunder fading into the night. And though she had won this round, Elena knew the storm was far from over. Adrian's desperation would make him more dangerous than ever. The days after Adrian's bitter plea felt strangely quiet. Elena lived with the unease of waiting for the next blow, knowing Adrian's rage would never rest. But for once, there was also something new in her life, a sense of possibility. It came in the form of Marcus Hale. He was no savior, no knight in shining armor. He had his flaws, his sharp temper, his ruthless streak in business. But with Lucas, he was gentle. And with Elena, he was patient. Where Adrian had once silenced her, Marcus listened. Where Adrian had tried to bury her, Marcus helped her stand taller. One crisp evening, Marcus invited Elena and Lucas to his estate on the outskirts of the city. The mansion was nothing like Adrian's cold penthouse. It felt lived in, warm, with fireplaces crackling and family portraits on the walls. Lucas darted through the halls in awe, laughter echoing. Mom, it's like a castle, he exclaimed, racing up the stairs. Elena smiled, her heart softening. It was the first time she had seen her son truly carefree in years. She turned to Marcus, who stood quietly by the fireplace, watching them both. You didn't have to do this, she said softly. Marcus shook his head. Yes, I did. You've been surviving, Elena, but you deserve more than survival. You deserve a life. His words lingered in the air. Elena's throat tightened, her eyes glistening. She had fought so hard just to keep breathing that she had never dared imagine more. Later that evening, as Lucas slept peacefully in a guest room, Marcus led Elena out onto the terrace. The city skyline glittered in the distance, stars scattered across the dark sky. Elena, he began, his voice steady, I've built empires. I've torn down rivals, but none of it has mattered. Not really. Not until you. She turned to him, startled. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Flipping it open revealed a simple but elegant diamond ring, its brilliance catching the moonlight. Elena's breath caught. Marcus, he stepped closer. I'm not asking you to forget the past. I know the scars you carry, and I know the fight isn't over. But I want to face it with you. Not as your shield, not as your savior, but as your partner. Marry me, Elena. Let's build something real together. Her hands trembled as tears spilled down her cheeks. She thought of the night Adrian left her bleeding, the years of hiding, the humiliation, the loneliness, and now here was a man offering her not pity, but partnership. Her voice shook. Marcus, I don't know if I can trust again. What if I fail? What if I'm broken beyond repair? He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing her tears. Then we'll fail together, and we'll rebuild, brick by brick, because broken doesn't mean unworthy, it means you survived. Her chest ached with emotion. For so long she had fought alone. For the first time she didn't feel alone anymore. She nodded slowly, a sob breaking free. Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Marcus's eyes softened with rare vulnerability as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then it settled. From now on, you and Lucas are mine to protect, always. Behind them, a light flickered in the shadows. A camera lens, hidden by the darkness, clicked silently. And as Elena embraced her new beginning, she had no idea Adrian had already seen everything and was preparing to turn her happiest moment into her greatest danger. The church bells tolled softly across the city, their sound floating through the crisp morning air. St. Augustine's Cathedral stood tall and majestic, its stained glass windows glowing with the light of dawn. Inside, every pew was filled. Friends, allies, and even skeptical reporters had gathered to witness what no one thought possible. Elena Carter, once declared dead, was about to walk down the aisle. Elena stood in the bridal suite, her reflection trembling in the mirror. The white silk gown draped over her frame like armor, delicate yet strong. Lucas, dressed in a small tuxedo, clutched her hand tightly. "You look like a princess, Mom," he whispered, his eyes shining. She smiled through tears, kissing his forehead. "And you're my prince." Marcus entered quietly, adjusting his tie. His eyes softened as he saw her. "You're ready," he said simply, as though the word carried every promise he intended to keep. But outside, danger stirred. A black SUV screeched to a halt near the church steps. Adrian stepped out, his face pale with rage, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. His empire was crumbling, Vanessa had deserted him, and the woman he once called his own was about to marry his greatest rival. He would not let it happen. Inside the church, the organ began its hymn. The doors opened, and Elena took her first steps down the aisle. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She was radiant, not as a victim but as a survivor, her head held high. Marcus stood waiting, his expression steady, his hand extended. Then, chaos. The cathedral doors slammed open with a thunderous crash. Adrian stormed in, his voice booming against the vaulted ceilings. "Stop this farce!" The congregation erupted into shocked murmurs. Photographers raised their cameras, flashes blinding. Adrian strode forward, his fists clenched, his fury echoing. "You can't marry him, Elena. You're my wife." Elena froze halfway down the aisle, her heart pounding. She met his eyes, seeing not love but obsession, desperation. Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between them. "This ceremony will continue. Leave, Adrian." Adrian's laughter was hollow, manic. "You think you can take everything from me? My company, my son, my wife? She'll never belong to you. She'll always be mine." Elena's voice cut through the noise, steady and clear. "I stopped belonging to you the night you left me to die." The words silenced the church. Even Adrian faltered, his face twisting with rage and humiliation. Security moved quickly, surrounding him. He struggled, shouting curses, but the crowd had already turned. Reporters captured every second, the once untouchable Adrian Carter dragged from a wedding he tried to destroy. As the doors slammed shut behind him, Elena exhaled, her shoulders trembling. Marcus stepped to her side, offering his hand once more. "Shall we?" Tears blurred her vision as she placed her hand in his. Together they walked to the altar, the congregation rising in support. The priest continued, his voice steady, as though no chaos had shattered the moment. Lucas, sitting in the front row, beamed proudly. For the first time in his young life, he saw his mother safe, cherished, and unbroken. When Marcus and Elena exchanged vows, their voices didn't just bind them to each other. They reclaimed everything Adrian had tried to steal. But as the crowd erupted in applause, Elena couldn't shake the chill creeping down her spine, because she knew Adrian's final move had yet to come. The applause from the wedding still echoed in Elena's ears when the cathedral doors burst open again. The crowd turned, gasping. Adrian Carter had returned, his suit disheveled, his eyes wild with desperation. He broke free from the guards who had dragged him out minutes earlier. His voice cracked as he shouted down the aisle. "Elena, this isn't over. You're my wife. You'll always be mine." The congregation tensed, fear rippling through the pews. Marcus stepped in front of Elena, his posture unyielding. "You don't own her, Adrian. Not anymore. Not ever." Adrian's chest heaved as he staggered closer, his words unraveling into a manic plea. "I built everything for us for her. And you," he spat at Marcus, "you stole it all. My company, my reputation, my family." Elena's voice cut through his rant, clear and steady. "You destroyed those things yourself, Adrian. You left me to die. You tried to erase me. but I survived, and I won't let you hurt us again." For the first time, Adrian faltered. His eyes flickered with something almost human: fear. The crowd watched in silence as the police, summoned during the earlier chaos, entered the cathedral. One officer held up a warrant. "Adrian Carter, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice." Adrian froze, his face draining of color. "No, this is a mistake. I'm Adrian Carter." But the officers didn't hesitate. They cuffed his wrists as reporters captured every second. The once untouchable billionaire was dragged out of the church, his shouts echoing off the stained glass. "Elena, you'll regret this." Silence fell heavy in his absence. Then the priest, steady and composed, looked at Elena and Marcus. "Shall we continue?" Elena exhaled shakily, tears slipping down her cheeks. She nodded. The vows were spoken again, but this time, every word carried the weight of survival, resilience, and rebirth. When Marcus said, "I do," his eyes locked on hers with fierce devotion. When Elena said, "I do," the entire room seemed to exhale with her, a collective release of years of silence and pain. The kiss that sealed their marriage was not just for them. It was for Lucas, who leapt from his seat, clapping wildly. It was for every person in the church who had witnessed the cruelty of Adrian's reign and the triumph of truth. Outside, bells rang joyfully, drowning out the last echoes of Adrian's fury. Later, at the reception, Elena stood on the terrace with Lucas by her side, Marcus's arm around her shoulders. The city stretched before them, no longer a place of fear but of promise. Lucas tugged at Marcus's sleeve. "Can I call you Dad now?" Marcus crouched, his eyes glistening. "Only if you want to." Lucas grinned. "I want to." Elena's heart swelled, tears slipping freely. She kissed her son's forehead, then leaned against Marcus. For the first time in years, she felt whole. The battle was over. Justice had prevailed. Adrian would face the consequences of his crimes, stripped of the power he once wielded like a weapon. And Elena, the woman left to die in a hospital bed, now stood as a bride, a mother, and a survivor who had built a future out of ashes. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Elena whispered softly, almost to herself, "We're free." Marcus pulled her closer. "No, Elena, we're just beginning." And with that, the story that began in betrayal ended in healing. Proof that even the darkest nights can give way to the brightest dawn. So that's how the story closes, my dear friends. You're still here with me, right? If you've stayed until this moment, it means something in this journey touched your heart in a way you didn't expect. And maybe, just maybe, it reminded you of something true in your own life. Elena's path teaches us that no matter how deep the betrayal, no matter how heavy the pain, we are never truly broken. We bend, but we don't shatter. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Think about that. Every obstacle Elena faced became the very path to her healing. And in our lives too, what hurts us can be what heals us, if we choose to rise. You, watching this right now, you've carried battles no one else can see. And yet you're still here, breathing, standing, surviving. That alone is victory. So if this story moved you, let it be a reminder. You are stronger than you think. Share this with someone who needs hope. Hit the like button if it touched you, and don't forget to subscribe, because together we'll keep finding light in the darkest nights. The storm outside rattled the hospital windows as Elena clutched her swollen belly, every contraction ripping through her body like fire. She was only 27, but the weight of the world already pressed down on her. "Adrian, please, don't leave me," she whispered, sweat beading on her pale forehead. Her husband, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit, stood at the edge of the bed with his phone buzzing in his hand. His eyes were cold, distracted. "Vanessa's waiting. You'll be fine. Doctors are here," he muttered, adjusting his cufflinks as if her life meant nothing. Elena's heart dropped. "I'm scared. The baby." But before she could finish, Adrian leaned closer, his voice sharp enough to cut through her pain. "You're weak, Elena. Always have been. Don't expect me to throw away my future for a mistake." And then, without a single glance back, he walked out, leaving her gasping in shock. Nurses rushed in, alarms blaring. "We're losing her." One shouted as Elena's body convulsed. Blood soaked the sheets. The room blurred, spinning into darkness. In that fleeting moment, Elena thought of her unborn son. She had promised him love, safety, a family. But now, even that was slipping away. Meanwhile, Adrian was across town, stepping out of a black limousine with Vanessa on his arm. Cameras flashed, capturing the perfect couple entering a glittering gala. When a reporter asked about his wife, Adrian smirked. "She couldn't make it," he said smoothly, raising a champagne glass. The crowd laughed, none knowing that at that very second, his wife was fighting for her life. Back at the hospital, a doctor whispered grimly, "Prepare the certificate." The machine beeped flat. Elena's hand slipped off the bed, lifeless. The world declared her gone. Adrian signed the papers without hesitation, never asking if the child survived. But destiny had other plans. A kind-hearted nurse refused to let Elena's story end that night. She made a choice that would change everything, because Elena was not truly gone, and 5 years later, she would return in a way no one could have imagined. The steady beep of machines had fallen silent, and the doctors had already shaken their heads. To them, Elena Carter was gone, a tragic end for a young mother-to-be. They recorded the time of death and prepared to move her body. But in the corner of the room stood Nurse Abigail, a woman in her 50s with years of experience and a heart too stubborn to give up on hope. As the team filed out, Abigail leaned over Elena's still body. She pressed her hands against Elena's chest and whispered, "Not tonight, sweetheart. Not like this." With fierce determination, she began chest compressions. Minutes stretched like hours. Then, faintly, a gasp. A fragile, broken sound, but enough to spark life. Elena's eyes flickered open for an instant before she drifted back into unconsciousness. Abigail's hands trembled as tears blurred her vision. Against hospital protocol, she signed false papers to cover the mistake. Officially, Elena Carter had died. Unofficially, she was alive. Barely. "I'll keep you safe," Abigail promised, her voice shaking. She knew Adrian had signed off without caring, and worse, she had seen his mistress waiting outside with cruel eyes. If Elena remained here, someone might make sure she didn't survive the night. 2 hours later, in the dim back hallway of the hospital, Abigail pushed a wheelchair with Elena slumped in it, a newborn swaddled tightly in her arms. No one paid attention. To the world, they were invisible. She loaded Elena and the baby into her beat-up station wagon and drove through the rain-soaked streets until city lights faded behind her. When Elena finally regained consciousness 2 days later, she was in a small cottage far from New York. Her body was weak, stitched and scarred, but alive. Panic surged as she touched her belly, then gasped at the tiny cry beside her. A baby boy, her son, lay bundled in a blanket. She broke down sobbing, clutching him to her chest. "Why?" she whispered hoarsely to Abigail, who sat nearby. "Because your husband left you to die," Abigail replied softly. "And because some lives are worth saving, even when the world doesn't care." The words cut Elena deeper than any scalpel. She remembered Adrian's cold eyes, his final words. Weak. A mistake. Those echoes would haunt her forever. She kissed her son's forehead and vowed silently, "You will never feel abandoned like I did." But survival was not simple. Adrian's wealth and influence reached everywhere. Abigail urged Elena to change her name and keep a low profile. For 5 years, Elena lived under an assumed identity, working menial jobs while raising her child in secrecy. She scrubbed floors, washed dishes, and stitched old clothes just to keep food on the table. There were nights when her body ached so badly she could barely move, but her son's smile gave her the strength to rise each morning. Meanwhile, Adrian remarried Vanessa, hosting extravagant parties splashed across magazines. To the world, he was a devoted husband and visionary businessman. Elena would sometimes catch a glimpse of him on television, his arm draped proudly around Vanessa. Rage and heartbreak twisted inside her. He had declared her dead, yet she was breathing every painful moment. Still, she stayed hidden for her son's safety. She thought she had escaped Adrian's shadow. But fate wasn't finished. Because 5 years later, Elena would step back into the very city that buried her, and the man she once loved would face the ghost he thought he buried. And when she did, she wouldn't be alone. Adrian's greatest enemy would be standing right beside her. The cottage where Elena and her son first hid became both sanctuary and prison. For the first few months, she lived in constant fear that Adrian's men would appear at the door. She had nothing but a fake name, a forged birth certificate, and the kindness of Nurse Abigail, who risked everything to keep their secret. Life was not glamorous. Elena, once a promising architect, found herself cleaning offices at night and serving tables at a roadside diner during the day. Her hands, once steady enough to sketch blueprints, were raw from bleach and scrubbing. She often fell asleep at the kitchen table, her son's tiny hand curled around her finger. It was survival, not living. Her son, whom she named Lucas, grew into a curious toddler with dark hair like his father but Elena's soft eyes. He was the reason she pushed forward. Every morning she whispered, "You're my miracle," before kissing his forehead. She never told him the truth about his father. How could she? To Lucas, she wanted the world to be safe and full of love. But the struggles were relentless. Rent collectors banged on the door, threatening eviction. At the grocery store, she counted pennies, embarrassed when she had to put items back. When Lucas grew sick with a high fever, Elena rushed him to the hospital only to be turned away because she had no valid insurance. Her knees buckled in despair, clutching him in the cold night air. That was the first time she whispered to herself, "I can't do this anymore." And yet, she did. With Abigail's help, Elena learned to sew clothes for neighbors, earning a few extra dollars. She patched holes in her shoes until the soles were nearly gone. But every time she looked into Lucas's smiling face, she found the strength to carry on. Meanwhile, the world outside painted a cruel picture. Adrian and Vanessa graced magazine covers, dripping with diamonds and power. Elena once stumbled across a newspaper with his photo. Adrian Carter, rising star in real estate. She felt her stomach twist. The man who left her to die now stood at the top, celebrated as a hero. Her hands shook so badly she tore the paper to pieces. The years carved resilience into Elena's soul, but also loneliness. At night, when Lucas was asleep, she sat by the window staring at the moon, her heart heavy with unspoken pain. She wondered if she'd ever be more than a ghost hiding from her past. One afternoon, Lucas came home from preschool with tears in his eyes. "Mom, why don't I have a dad like the other kids?" His innocent question sliced through her like a knife. She pulled him close, whispering, "You have me. That's enough." But deep down, guilt and sorrow consumed her. How long could she keep the truth buried? By the 5th year, Elena had mastered the art of disappearing. Different towns, different jobs, always running, always looking over her shoulder. She thought she had finally built a fragile shield around her son's life. But fate is never kind to those who try to hide forever. Because one night, while leaving the diner after her shift, Elena froze in the parking lot. A black luxury car rolled slowly by, its tinted window lowering just enough for her to glimpse a familiar profile inside. Her blood ran cold. It was Adrian. And though she thought she had buried the past had just found her again. The night she saw Adrian's face through the tinted car window, Elena's heart nearly stopped. For years, she had lived like a shadow, praying their paths would never cross again. But fate had other plans. She grabbed Lucas's hand tighter and hurried home, every step echoing with dread. The next morning, life gave her no time to process the fear. Lucas woke up flushed, coughing violently. His small chest heaved with every breath. Elena rushed him to the nearest hospital, praying they would treat him despite her lack of insurance. The receptionist's cold eyes barely glanced at the feverish boy before shaking her head. "Without valid documents, we can't admit him." Elena's knees buckled. "Please, he's just a child." Her voice cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. But the receptionist looked away, unmoved. Elena collapsed in the waiting area, clutching Lucas's burning body, whispering, "Don't leave me too." That was when a tall figure in a dark coat stepped forward. "What's the problem here?" His voice was commanding, calm but edged with authority. The receptionist straightened instantly. "Sir, Mr. Hale, I didn't realize." Elena blinked through her tears. The man crouched down to meet her eyes. He had sharp features, steel gray eyes, and an aura of power that filled the room. "I'll cover the costs," he said firmly. "Get the boy a room, now." Doctors rushed to take Lucas inside. Elena, shaking, turned to the stranger. Why are you helping us?" Marcus Hale extended his hand, but there was no warmth in his smile. "Because I don't like watching innocent people suffer. And because I know exactly who you are, Elena." Her blood froze. "What?" He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You're Adrian Carter's wife, or should I say, widow? The woman he abandoned." Elena staggered back. "No, you're mistaken." But Marcus only smirked. "I make it my business to know everything about my enemies. and Adrian Carter is my enemy." The weight of his words crushed her. She had spent years hiding, and now, in one night, two powerful men had found her, one who had betrayed her, and another who seemed to want something she couldn't yet understand. Hours later, Lucas lay resting in a hospital bed, his fever finally breaking. Elena sat by his side, holding his tiny hand. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his imposing figure casting a shadow across the room. "You don't have to thank me," he said coolly. "But you should know, Adrian will stop at nothing if he learns you're alive. You and your son are in more danger than you realize." Elena's voice trembled. "Why are you telling me this? Why do you care?" Marcus's expression hardened. "Because hurting Adrian is the one thing I care about most, and you may be the key to his downfall." Elena's heart pounded. She wanted to scream that she wanted no part of revenge, no part of Adrian's world. But deep inside, she knew her life was no longer hers to control. She had been pulled back into a game she never wanted to play. And now she stood between two titans locked in war, her ruthless ex-husband and his greatest foe. What Elena didn't know was that both men would stop at nothing to claim her.